believe I've got my first ever repeat guest? And who better than the fabulous Dan Astin-Gregory? For anyone who's not checked out the previous episode, please do that because it'll set a bit of a context to what we're going on to discuss. But Dan is the host of the Pandemic podcast. He's literally had millions of views and downloads since this first started. I think I'm right in saying you started it September last year. Is that correct, Dan?
October last year, yeah, now reached over 10 million views in the last 12 months now, and growing, despite the challenges with censorship and being deplatformed a couple of times on the way.
Well, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But you've been putting out some phenomenal content, challenging the mainstream rhetoric, which we'll go into. But let's just start off with a little bit about you. What have you been up to? So last time we were on, it was just before the you had the Question Everything Summit in London. What's been happening with you since then?
Well, gosh, that feels like a lifetime away now. I mean, that was only July, and we chose the timing in July because we believed we'd have like a small window where the world isn't hysterical about COVID, so that we can actually have what I would deem an adult conversation without fear and just the ludicrousy of the situation that we found. So just to take stock, just to take a breather and say, well, has this situation actually helped or hindered the situation? It was a very successful event. That event itself had 1 to 2.5, I think it's about 2.5 million views globally and over 1 million in the UK. Just people who are really interested in finding out, what is the evidence now say, because we're 2 years in pretty much. So that took place in July, and I thought we would have a window of opportunity where the madness would stop, but it's only escalated more. It's got crazier. Times have got crazier since that lockdown summit. In many ways, it was a breath of fresh air that it wasn't too crazy at that point, but it didn't take very long for things to get pretty wild. And once again, they're wild again with the latest news of the latest variant. So what have I been doing? Well, I've been really evaluating my own position in this situation. I've gone from starting a podcast where I wanted to use my skills as a podcast host to, question everything. It's the subtitle of my podcast and the title of the event, to take a critical look at what's happening. I've been doing that since February 2020 anyway, and wanted to kind of share some of the insights that I was finding, which in many ways were very different to what was being publicized in the mainstream press. So I've doubled down and done more and more of that. Started to look at the kind of what I call it the yarn ball, all of the different strands, the different threads that kind of underpin the why question. Why is this happening in this way in particular? Not why is there a virus, although that is an important question. But why is the world responding in this way, and trying to make sense of the psychology, the sociology, the cultural factors, the political factors, economic factors that's underpinning all of these things. So I've been doubling down on the kind of moving away from the science and the medicine, because whilst the science and the medical side isn't settled, there's some clear patterns and trends there. There's kind of a level of understanding that we can now garner from 2 years of data. So it's really about looking at the philosophy of what's going on and becoming more of a campaigner. It took a long time for me to embrace the term activist. I'd never previously been to a protest. I'd signed the odd petition here and there and donated to the odd cause here and there over my time. But never been as politically active as I have in the last 18 months. So really doubling down on activism, supporting campaigns, launching campaigns, really chipping away at some of the more draconian authoritarian measures that are unfolding, and also trying to kind of put the foundation in place for long-term change, because what we're witnessing is, I believe, the tip of the iceberg, which many of the kind of the undercurrent of what's driving this is under the surface. It's underwater. Most people can't see that. So through my investigation, through the content we've been doing, starting to see what some of those undercurrents are. And it doesn't necessarily paint the most exciting future. So I've been building foundations for my own organization, change organization, building a nonprofit to look at how we can create long-term change and whilst preserving our freedoms and our human rights, and ensuring that a kind of Western culture isn't damaged by what we've gone through in the last 2 years.
It's really interesting. You missed out a very small point there as well, Zac. And of course, it's the introduction to Little Zac into the world.
Yes. I mean, I went straight into kind of like COVID related stuff, but yeah, in the meantime, I've had my first child. He's 12 weeks old. I've had the blissful journey of becoming the blissful and most challenging journey of becoming a parent. But you know, he was just in here a minute ago. I said, "Come in here and help me write this email. I've only got 10 minutes." I said, "I need your creativity." Just the inspiration of having a child around you. But he's doing fantastically well, and it's just when I look at him, I see the future. You know, I see the world unfolding in his eyes, and it's the world that he has been brought into is not the world that I'd like to see him grow up in. So that's why I'm driven more than ever to make sure that he grows up with greater rights, freedoms, and opportunities than I had. But very much at this point in time, they're under threat. I mean, these rights and freedoms are under threat, and it's not temporary. You know, anyone that thinks that what we're experiencing now is a temporary problem is deluded. You need to look to, I'm sorry to say that, but you just need to look to history to recognize that, you know, once you kind of give this power to the governments and central organizations, they rarely relinquish it without a fight. So it's important to recognize the state of play that we're in. So Zac's arrival has given me immense inspiration, and brings a new dynamic to it. It's another opportunity.
A sleepless dynamic, Dan.
A sleepless dynamic. I was honestly on the way to this podcast, I was thinking, what day is it? Oh, Monday. It's the first day of the week. You know, it's like I've been rocking and rolling since early this morning, and I've barely had any sleep. He's going through sleep regression, so I've barely had any sleep. I don't know what day it is, but just just pushing forward because we have to. But it's the greatest personal and spiritual. Having a child and going through this situation simultaneously is the greatest personal and spiritual gift I could ever have, because. Well, you know, many people through history have said, you know, where there's a crisis, there is also an opportunity, and there is a gift. And I do believe that what we focus on is what we find. And if we're looking for the gift in the situation, then we can find it. And there's a phrase I heard from Ram Dass just this morning: everywhere you look, you will see exactly what you're looking for. So, you know, it's funny. I made a joke just the other day. I said, I wake up in the mornings, I pull up my Twitter, and I think, what tyranny am I going to discover today? What new tyranny will I find today? But the point is that's if you begin looking for that, you're training your mind to look for problems in the world. And actually, the more you look, the more you'll find. You know that there, and that is true of any time. So it's been a big lesson for me to actually flip back and say, you know, to start looking for the good in the world and the vibrant and the magic and the inspiration and the creativity, because we have to get the balance of understanding what the problems are in order to come back to conscious awareness and say, well, how do we make a change here?
Yeah, I love that. And I actually heard you say on the pandemic podcast that you regularly do things as well to challenge your own bias because of the nature of the podcast and our social media feeds. It's easy to just get that echo chamber, and you're very mindful to always put yourself in situations where you're getting opposing views and trying to speak to doctors and scientists that have they may challenge your particular view of the situation as well. And I think that's really healthy, isn't it?
It is. I mean, let's take the vaccinations for example. You know, I've taken a very critical look at some of the adverse sides of the product, but I haven't taken as much time looking at the potential benefits, the potential upside. And it's important that if you're obviously evaluating any product, you've got to look at the pros and the cons. And by doing that, I made some really interesting insights. Unfortunately, it took me full circle. And what it revealed to me is I tried to look for root cause problems. And we've got a real root cause problem in the sense that we have this very myopic view when it comes to COVID. You know, reducing COVID cases, hospitalizations, and deaths is the primary focus of all governments right now. But they've got tunnel vision on it, but they don't see what's in the periphery. So even if you see COVID deaths falling, if you've then got all-cause mortality rising from other causes, you're not actually saving lives. You're, and I called it creative accounting in a previous podcast. And you have to be careful what you say because, you know, you have to be careful accusing governments of misrepresentation. But you've got to look at the point is you've got to look at the whole picture. You know, it's all very well one column showing a favorable impact, but if all the other columns are showing code red, warning signs, then we have to be paying attention to that. But nonetheless, not only challenging my own biases, but actually looking at how do I empathize? Because what this has done and continues to do is it drives people into boxes. It puts us into silos. It creates a wedge. It creates division among society. The policies are deliberately divisive. The media is deliberately divisive. Yet in my core, I would like to unify human beings. I'm a spiritual being who believes in oneness, and all of what we're experiencing right now is contravening that oneness. So I do also spend quite a bit of time trying to put my head into the mind of people who see the world completely differently and try to empathize and see the world through their eyes. And by doing that, it helps me get a greater understanding of how perhaps they've come to their perspective and their understanding of the world. And it's just funny, really, because when I was just thinking about this morning on my morning jog, it's a jog at this stage because my fitness is one of the things that suffered throughout this pandemic. Normally it'd be a run. It's now a jog. But I listen to stuff. So I'm like, I'll stop and pay attention to that. But it's I was taking the time to imagine, what other people, what are people feeling now about this new variant? And this, because I know my family, my parents are scared. And I was trying to put my mind in their space. And you start to see, like my mother, for instance, as a scared little girl, the fear in her. And, therefore, those people who are afraid of the virus see those who are acting in discord with government policy as the threat. Whereas those who see the government policy as the threat and those complying with government policy, they see them as the threat. And all of a sudden, we've got two groups of people who both see each other as the enemy, which is just deeply harmful for society, but it's also deeply harmful for the individual. So I've been spending a lot of time trying to get a better understanding of how people are making sense of the world in order that I can understand people better, so I can communicate better to others, and trying to find a way to build a bridge amongst people, because ultimately that's how we're going to get through this. And no matter how you look at this, whether you're afraid of the virus or you're afraid of the growing totalitarianism, but the way through both parts of that problem is through bringing people together through love. And I'm constantly trying to walk the line between kind of spiritual activism, awakened activism, and then traditional resistance through campaigns, protests. This week I'm going to the police bill protest in London on Wednesday to take a stand against that. With many other campaign groups, just to make sure this police bill, our voices are heard. The House of Lords, it's your kind of final opportunity to save the right to protest. And then Friday, also demonstrating in my own city around vaccine passports. So as much as I'm kind of in the headspace of trying to get into that loving, compassionate, spiritual, evolutionary path where we are all one and trying to bring that unity. On the other hand, I'm also looking at what can we practically do in order to overturn what's happening right now.
I think they're both equally important, though, because the language, I hate using the word sides, but for all intents and purposes, the language on both sides can be quite inflammatory. And like you, I think, you need a higher level of thinking to be able to tackle the problem. The same level of thinking is not going to get us out of this situation. And I think on a grassroots level, we're not talking about the global elite here or your Anthony Fauci's of this world, but on a grassroots level, people are behaving in a way that they believe on either side that is the socially responsible thing to do for themselves and their family. But I don't think anyone, I was speaking to my dad about this, who's in his late 60s, and there's never been a time in his lifetime where we've experienced such division, not to this extent. I mean, this makes Brexit looks like absolute child's play, but I think that's why, like, your Together declaration and some of the other work that you're doing is gaining such traction, because like yourself, I mean, I don't think anyone's got the right to ask anyone their medical status in terms of vaccination, but I don't mind disclosing the fact that based on the research I've done, we've made the decision for us and our family absolutely not to have that vaccination. But I've also got, probably very similar situation to you with your mum. I've also got, my dad's had the vaccination, my sister's had the vaccination, my best friend's had the vaccination, and ultimately we stand together, we stand united for human rights. And I think when you look at what's going on in the world, this is a problem for everyone. At what point it becomes a problem for them is an entirely different discussion. But when we see, I mean, it's not just human rights being stripped. It's what's happening in Australia and Austria and Canada and Italy, and Germany. It's beyond heartbreaking. And unless we pull together as and unite as one globally, we're going to get to the point of no return. But like you said before we went live with this, it's a really exciting time, and actually it's a time of hope. And I think that's where the message needs to come from, because when you come at things from a place of fear, you can feel despondent. You think, well, what's the point in attending the protest? What's the point in signing the petition? What's my contribution going to do? What's the point in picking up the phone to my MP? But actually, there's nothing certain about the future. We're in the moment, and there's tens of millions of us that feel the same way, and actually we're just buying into that government narrative or new world order narrative, whatever you want to call it, if we start living in that place of fear.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many important points you've raised there. I mean, firstly, on the kind of division piece, I remember during the American elections, I've got friends in America on both sides of the political divide, and it is a political divide. They've only got two parties, really two dominant parties. But it's interesting talking to them, because you can find things that if you are someone who's a Republican and you support Trump, for instance, you can find things that they dislike about Republican politics and Trump. Same with Democratic politics and Biden. You can ask the Democrats and you can ask Biden fans, surely there's things that you think that he could do better or differently. And you can always find those pieces which end up becoming common ground amongst people. A lot of this is about finding the common ground. And with this activism piece, I've tried to look at it like in a sporting sense, really, in that whilst you're in the quote unquote battle, whilst you're in the resistance, whilst you're tackling these issues, they effectively become the other side, like in sport. But you can quite reasonably come off the pitch and still have respect for your opponent as human beings. And everyone is doing their thing at their karmic understanding of the world. And the more we can start to actually see the humanity in people, then the more we can actually bring it back. Because actually one of the things that has detracted is that lack of human connection. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One is it plays into the piece around unification, but also secondly, this, you and I have been through lots of personal development. We know that this is a game of influence, really. This is a game of influence. And the amount of success stories I've heard in the world of entrepreneurship, where the person called 1,000 different customers to finally get their first yes. We're in that same space. So and I remember being at a Tony Robbins event, and he asked the audience, how many times have you tried to succeed at the thing that you're trying to succeed at? Oh, loads of times. Well, how many times? Tell me specifically what you've done. And he chunks it down. It's like, oh, I've done these two things. Right, you've done these two things. So you said you did 1,000 things a minute ago. Have you only done these two things? If we only write to the MP once and we get a no, we don't get the answer we want, and we give up, well, we're never going to get anywhere. We need a bit of conviction. And we also need to recognize that if we keep doing the same thing, get the same result. Einstein calls it madness, insanity. But we just change our approach until we get the result we want. So if you become despondent after not receiving a reply from your email at your MP, or he or she replies in a different way, change your approach. Find out what's more important to them. The best thing I've ever learned about influence is, if you want to influence other people, find out what already influences them. So actually part of this now is understanding, rather than becoming a hindrance to our MPs, which often we will be if we're banging down the doors and yelling for blood, or saying we're not going to vote for you at the next election. Whilst we know that pleasure, pain, that people do more to avoid pain. Realistically, MPs, the biggest thing, that if there are hundreds and thousands of people in their constituency who are against them, then they will probably have to change their approach. But ultimately, if we can find out how to help them achieve their goals, the words of Zig Ziglar, you help other people get what they want, you'll get everything you need. Then we can start to, help MPs drive the cause. I mean, I'm trying to use reverse psychology at the minute, say I'm here to help you stand against vaccine passports, to make sure that the small businesses in our area don't suffer as a result of government policy. And if your MP is a Labour MP or your MP is a Conservative, then just use the tactics. Pit them against each other. Use what's going on against us in our favour. So it comes back to having a bit of patience and recognizing that we just got to keep going. We've just got to keep going. If we give up, we'll lose. You miss 100%. I'm just going to cliche it to the max on your show. Wayne Gretzky, miss 100% of the shots you don't take. If we're not shooting, we ain't scoring. And it's the same in business. It's the same in activism. We've got to get involved, and we've got to lead with excitement, enthusiasm, conviction, courage, because then we create a ripple effect. We create a ripple effect amongst others who say, oh, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. And I remember talking about this on Friday on my podcast, and the amount of people said in the comments, they were saying all this negative stuff at MP. I was like, you can be negative if you want. It's not going to change anything. Change is the result is guaranteed if we do nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas at least if we take action, then we have a chance at changing things.
You know what though, Dan, you're completely right, and I fully agree with you. And the amount of people I know that are so distrusting of politicians, they're so distrusting of the government. Yet you ask them, how they feel that the vaccine mandates or soon to be vaccine mandates been handled, and suddenly it's a completely different story. But you're right in what you're saying. A lot of people feel helpless at the moment. They feel hopeless at the moment. I think we've got a pandemic of mental health like we've never seen before. We've got the suicide rates are really high. The psychiatric units are absolutely brimming. And whilst I fully agree with everything that you've just said, I can understand why people feel like that, because that was me a couple of months ago. I was just thinking this is absolutely futile. It just feels like we're getting propaganda from every angle. I'm going to be perfectly honest and admit I've never been in a minority before, and as much as we'll never really know what the true statistics are on the uptake of the vaccination, it's safe to say that we're very much in a minority. And I've never really been the on the receiving end of such division, such hatred, when you've got family members turning on each other, friends not wanting you to go to their kids' birthday parties because you've not had the vaccination, and all this kind of thing. I think it's important to acknowledge the severity of the situation. But on the counter side of that, there is tens of millions of us, and there's some phenomenal people out there. You've got some of the best and brightest minds in the world collaborating and doing lots of great work. People like yourself that are campaigning effortlessly behind the scenes, tirelessly behind the scenes. And we're looking at solutions to this. We're preparing for the worst whilst hoping for the best. And people are looking at recreating alternative societies, new schools, new hospitals. And you actually spoke before we hit the record button on your sort of longer term, I don't know if aspiration is the right word, but basically how all this COVID madness has really unearthed something in you that perhaps you'd never have identified, because these institutions are so deeply rotten that we really do need to coin Boris's phrase. We really do need to build back better. And you've actually completely sort of stepped away, albeit temporarily, from your main business, from your bread and butter, your source of income, so you can focus entirely on this mission.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I just want to address our previous point, that just to say that there's many days where I feel completely despondent and disempowered by, the weight of what's happening in the world. It's natural to feel that way. It totally is. And it's overwhelming. And, when I said earlier on, you wake up and look at Twitter and you think, what new tyranny am I going to witness today? It becomes a reality. It does. You almost have to meditate every day before even picking up your phone. If you're going to look at the news, it's probably a good, healthy habit to do that anyway, the best of times. But yes, I've been applying entrepreneurial thinking to this in many different ways. One, from a strategic point of view, as an activist point of view, how do we get smarter about how we start to influence change? Because this is a human problem. My business mentor says to me, her quote is, I've got 99 problems and every one of them is a human being. And the reality is all of the problems we're facing now are human problems. The virus is just being and doing a virus. It's doing its thing. It's following its natural course. It's the humans that are screwing around with it and causing all kinds of problems in all kinds of ways. And as a result, when we talk about systems and structures, it's the reality is they are a collection of human beings. actually we have to think about how we influence people through individual conversations. But I just wanted to draw upon that point. So I've been looking at entrepreneurial strategy, but I've entrepreneurial thinking in terms of strategy, but I've also been looking at from how do I blend content creation, activism, and entrepreneurship going forward. So I've been looking at, because this is, I did not believe that coming up to Christmas in 2021 that we'd still be going through this. I did not believe that would be the case, although deep down I knew it would. I'm still shocked that we're still going through this in the way that we are. So now I have to prepare in a different ways. I'm fully committed. I'm all in. I'm all in on tackling the issues that we're facing here. I put all of my business interests on hold, my traditional business interests. So now, I mean, I may never go back to them. Now I've become so inspired by the situation in terms of the situation has laid bare many of the problems that we're facing in the world, both from a systemic and structural perspective, whether that's politics, whether that's healthcare, whether that's science, whether that's media. It's shone a light on the major problems, the systemic fallibilities and injustices within these different areas. That there's now an exciting opportunity to look at how we reimagine the future. I'm now talking about resistance and reimagination, because we need to do both. We need to resist what's going on, but we now need to reimagine the future because the future is yet to unfold. And fear can disable us in so many ways. Fear can hold us in the past, or it can create a false image of the future that is yet to emerge. We're living in this present moment, and we get the opportunity to define what the future looks like. And again, taking inspiration from having a son now, the kind of world I want him to grow up in. I'm looking at, how do we start to create content about the future of politics, the future of education, the future of healthcare, with the goal of stimulating conversations that can spark the kind of creativity and innovation amongst people to start thinking for themselves, well, actually, if we did do this differently, we could start by doing X, Y, and Z. And then eventually I want to create an organization that gives people the tools and the platform for actually to take their ideas and create them into reality, so that when your dream of the new healthcare system, you need the backing, the finance, the support. We want to be able to pull people together to say this is what we can do to support you in making that a reality. But also from an ideological point of view, this is an ideological battle. This is somewhat of an assault on individual rights. It's many ways we're seeing a very, very kind of radical collectivist strategy unfolding here. And we can still preserve the collective interest whilst maintaining the individual rights. That for me personally, I've always believed that it's like yin and yang. You need individual rights and you need the collective interest as well. And it's about how do we avoid the pendulum swing into pure collectivism and at the sacrifice of individual rights. So there's part of the work I want to do is to try and look at the cultural, social, economic fabric of what's going on here, to see if we can find a better balance in order so that we avoid these kind of rapid, because history shows us we go in cycles. This is nothing new. It's new in the sense that we live in a world of the more advanced technological situation that which previous situations like this have not had. But that's only contextually true because, in the 60s when, people watching color televisions, etc., they thought that was, cutting edge. But right now, looking back, but it's still true that technology is advancing at a speed that we've never seen before. And it changes a lot of things. But many of the problems that we're facing right now, you can still read about in the philosophy books written 2,000 years ago. It's the human condition. So whilst in the practical sense, I want to look at how do we start to look at and reimagine the systems and structures of the world. I also want to spend my time doing what I originally set out to do, which is to help elevate humanity, which is looking at how we can evolve our human consciousness and how we can transform ourselves in order to become more loving, compassionate beings, so that when a situation comes like this again, we have a much stronger defense, not only physically, mastering our vitality, but also mentally and emotionally and spiritually, so that we don't end up down a path like this, which is where humanity is stripped to its threads, stripped bare, and just the very fabric of society is torn apart. We can't afford to have this happen again. So I want to dedicate the rest of my life to making a difference in the world. The term I am an activist now. I'm a campaigner. I'm still a content creator and an entrepreneur, a critical thinker, now a father, already a husband, and a brother and a son, and all the other titles you can give yourself. But for the rest of my life, I want to spend my life just looking at how we can make the world a better place and how we can help each individual also thrive in order so they live inspiring lives.
You know, it's really important because you've had to tap into a higher level of consciousness, and now you're trying to encourage other people to do the same. And while it comes with its burdens, I certainly feel like since I've awoken to some of these issues, that I'm operating at a different level. You know, I've managed to get to 38 and be completely oblivious to how the world works. Whilst that's very different to having all the answers, like I mean, I had no clue about any of this stuff. You know, I'd never heard of Soros or things like this, and you know, this was the stuff of conspiracy theorists. Even 12 months ago, to be having conversations like this, I just thought, you know, absolutely insane. But it just doesn't seem, well, okay, I mean, you've got to laugh, otherwise you cry, but it's just not about the science, is it? And you know, I know you were citing in one of your previous podcasts about the Pfizer trials that have been released from, I mean, you take anything, the Pfizer, I keep calling them Pfizer, the Pfizer trials, take anything that they say with a pinch of salt. But even by their own admission, the study on the 12 to 15-year-olds, it showed, I think it was a 3% reduction in cases and absolutely no increase whatsoever, not one increase when it came to serious illness or death.
Absolutely. I mean, I've always had a healthy skepticism of big industry, full stop. That comes from my previous background working in financial services, where I was exposed to businesses of every shape and size, from individual startup right through to major Fortune 100 companies. And you have to look at the lack of regulation of some of these massive, and I can't believe I'm saying this as a free market entrepreneur, but look at some of the companies like Pfizer, Moderna, who have been able through their history to flout rules, cause harm, and get away with it time after time, misrepresent information, shelter data. It's been consistent. You know, I mean, there's so many issues around the Pfizer trials. I mean, some of that's, you know, it's been put to court in America now, and they've been given until something like 2072 or something, 2071, 50 years to reveal all the data from this. And the early papers that are coming out are already shocking. But just this week, upon the announcement of the new variant, the Pfizer and Moderna shareholders have pocketed a collective £7.8 billion. But you know, I called that in February 2020. Immediately, you could see that this was a huge playground for the corporates, and that there would be billions made out of this situation. Before that, I mean, that's February, before we even hit the first lockdown. It was just the signs were already there. And I don't have a history of, you know, predicting these things or skeptically looking at these markets, other than having a healthy skepticism of big industry on the basis that they have too much power. And I find it very hard that people can't see through that. If you take some of the particular issues around vaccine mandates and vaccine passports, they're predicated on the idea that they're to reduce risk. No matter what studies you look at, you can see that the vaccines don't, as an endpoint. And this was clear before the products were even released. I remember reading the BMJ. There was an article by Peter Doshi, one of the chief editors of the British Medical Journal, who was saying that, you know, the vaccines, their endpoint is not case reduction. It's not to reduce infections. It's to limit severity of disease. In many ways, it comes across like a therapeutic in that sense. So if we know quite clearly that the risk reduction in terms of transmission and infections and cases is negligible at best, well, then that completely, on the first line, invalidates any form of vaccine mandate, any form of vaccine passport, on the basis that both of them are designed to reduce infections. So that argument falls flat straight away, unless you're literally going to manage the entire thing on like a fractional result, which is the marginal gains are so small, it makes absolutely no sense. So then the second argument comes in at, well, it's going to, by reducing severity of disease, it's going to reduce the burden on the NHS. But again, that's an entirely flawed approach, because that's still predicated on the idea, which is still populist, the still popular idea, and it is an idea rather than fact, that all cases result in ICU treatment. Yeah. You know, that everyone is equal risk. It's just not true. The data quite clearly shows now. And you would have thought, just using Common Sense Corner, 2 years into this, that the world has studied this virus like no other, and we have an incredible amount of data. We can quite clearly see the risk patterns that lead to severe illness, hospitalization, and death. Yet everyone is still being treated as though they are equally at risk. It's just a joke. But of course, there are always exceptions. But again, we appear to be managing for the rare exception, which again, it goes down to, well, we need to get everyone vaccinated to almost try and limit every possible hospitalization. But what we're not looking at is the cost of making that decision, nor are we looking at the actual reality of the results that's been promised. So we've got all of this happening, and we've got the shareholders profiting extensively from these policies. And you have to ask yourself, who throughout this pandemic response is gaining from maintaining the status quo? And there are a lot of people gaining. There are politicians, corporations, and even individuals within their roles. When I had Professor Matthias Desmet on the podcast, he talked about two of the four kind of primary reasons for kind of a descent into authoritarianism is that, one, people start to attach their own inner anxieties to an external threat like a virus, so they no longer have to confront their own inner anxieties. It becomes a pacifier. And secondly, it's a lack of meaning that people have in their lives. And actually, one of the biggest problems we're experiencing right now, and the reason why your show is so important on emission, is that people don't have meaning and purpose. So you get people like politicians who actually don't want to let go of this. So when the Omicron variant came out, it's like it's fuel on the fire again, because people don't want to go back. This is the sad reality. People don't want to go back to the lives that they had pre-COVID. It's given people a distraction. It's taken people away from the monotony of their regular lives. But that's not a reason. That's not a reason to perpetuate some of the worst crimes against humanity in history.
Well, so speaking about the worst crimes against humanity in history, I've always, like yourself, been quite fascinated with human behavior, and in particular, what happened in World War II. And I'm quite interested in the history behind it, and I understand that nothing's clear cut. And there was a huge economic problem in Germany after the First World War, and the hyperinflation, and the morale was pretty low. But I've never really been able to understand how the few were able to behave in such an atrocious way towards the masses, and how that could happen, albeit gradually over quite a relatively short period of time. And one of the podcast episodes of yours I listened to that really pulled a punch was where you listed the 10 stages of genocide. Would you just run through those with the listeners, please? Because I think that was hugely powerful.
Yes, I'll have to remind myself of the specific order, but I need to give you some context on that conversation, because what I speak to is the precursors to what's going on, the precursors, because of course, we're not making a direct comparison to the atrocities that took place in World War II, but we can look at some of the social and cultural factors that led to what happened in World War II, and how we can compare that to other situations, including this situation that we're currently facing. There are, of course, many distinctions, many differences, but it's important to recognize that there are similarities.
A lot.
So the first one is classification, that people are divided into an us or them. And we've seen that recently with the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Now that's become an ever-changing scale. I mean, Israel have just announced the fourth vaccination, which will invalid. The fully vaccinated definition has gone from 2 doses to then 3, and then 4 now in Israel. So overnight, you can go from being fully vaccinated at 3 doses to, but nonetheless, point is, by the approach that's been taken, there's been a clear division into the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. But you're also then seeing, which is one of the third points I'll come to in a minute, is the discrimination. But then you get the symbolization. This is the second stage of genocide. People are forced to identify themselves. That's what that means. So it doesn't necessarily mean like a badge, but you're forced to identify yourself by a category. So right now, with the vaccine passports and other forms of COVID certification, people are having to reveal their vaccination status. So they're having to identify themselves as vaccinated or unvaccinated. And by the way, doesn't the term unvaccinated sound pretty horrible? That's very deliberate. It's like anything that begins with unattractive, unhelpful. You know, they are negative words. You know, whereas if you don't go to if you've got an allergy to dairy, you don't go to the supermarket and ask for an undairy cheese. You'd ask for a dairy-free, or a dessert. You'd ask for a dairy-free dessert. So I think vaccine-free is a better way to describe the situation. But nonetheless, people are symbolized, forced to identify themselves. And the third is then discrimination, so that they people begin to face systemic discrimination. So we're quite clearly seeing that. There were some devastating images from Germany already, where Germany have now put the unvaccinated or the vaccine-free into lockdown. There's some horrifying pictures of literal fences being put up around buildings and inside of shopping malls, where people who have chosen not to be vaccinated are being excluded from society. So that's a form of discrimination based upon someone's personal choices, yes, but a human characteristic. If you boil it down to the category of human characteristics, that's what's happening. We're discriminating on human characteristics. So number 4 is then dehumanization, where people are equated with animals, vermin, or disease. We're seeing people describe it as the pandemic of the unvaccinated. You see all these false headlines of hospitals being overrun by people who are unvaccinated, painting people as the great unwashed and the source of all virus and all illness. That is again dehumanization, and we're seeing that. And if you spend enough time on social media, you'll see some atrocious posts where you're seeing people saying that people should be sent to prison or killed for putting everyone else at risk. Can
I just say on that point, Dan? It's became socially acceptable. All this hashtag
yes.
That's nonsense. But that's only for people. It's not even who share your worldview. It's like Rwanda. It's like they were classed as cockroaches, and this was exactly the same for the Jews in World War II as well. It's like to say we've been dehumanized is an understatement.
Absolutely. And then organization, the government creates special groups to enforce the policies. We've seen the COVID police. You've seen the videos out of Australia. This is being heavily policed, but it's not only being policed by the government. It's being policed by private organizations, by virtue of government order. Polarization is number 6. Propaganda, which turns the populace against the oppressed group. I mean, it's just constant. It's a constant stream of propaganda. So that further polarizes the us and them, based on that initial classification. Then number 7 is preparation, which is preparing to remove or relocate people that belong to certain categories. We haven't seen that yet here in the United Kingdom, but just look at the facility in Australia. There's some shocking footage of how people are being treated in these internment camps for people not necessarily who are unvaccinated, but who have been deemed a threat because of their COVID status. But there's lots of people inside of those camps who are not even COVID positive, but they've just been deemed a potential threat because they're not wearing masks or they're not complying. So we're seeing literally people being removed from society physically. And when we're talking about Australia here, folks, Australia, we're not talking about some third world developing nation that's got a less, an unsophisticated political system or an unsophisticated economy. We're talking about Australia, a historically free democracy. So this is happening. That's stage 7 on the 10 stages of genocide. Then you go into stage 8, and I really, really, really don't hope we go that far, because persecution is stage 8, where people are killed, their properties removed, people are physically harmed.
Can I just say though, we are now hearing stories of people getting forcibly vaccinated against their will at certain parts of the world.
We are hearing stories. Again, Australia's come up in that conversation. There's a tribe in Australia that are completely indigenous, they're an indigenous tribe. They're not going to. They could become ravaged with COVID, and it's not going to affect anyone other than their own community. It's You're absolutely right. And I sadly said, as I saw this, because we've gone from stage 1 to 7 pretty quickly. And, you know, people can dispute all these comparisons, but it's real. It's happening. And the same thing happened during the World War II at the early stages. Is you were deliberately cast as conspiracy theorists for calling out what was happening. You know, look through history. In fact, sadly, when I had COVID myself in July, I was ill for about a week. And I spent that time researching history. I spent that time looking at, you know, what are the precursors to this type of thing. And, you know, because I wanted to understand how could World War II have been avoided? Could the Nazi regime, could that have been stopped? And the answer is probably not, unless it stopped early enough in its tracks. Because once, as we've seen with this situation, once you create that polarization where you've literally got members of society who are no longer witnessing what's happening for what it is, and we've got the bystander effect where even if people are afraid and concerned, they become disempowered and afraid to stand up to the oppressor. So they stand and hope that other people will, as we talked about earlier on today, they'll hope that other people will take the action. Then you get this huge bystander effect, and society then enables what's going on. And going back to the question you asked me earlier about long-term societal change, well, off the back of World War II, the United Nations was formed, which was designed to accelerate world peace. And to be quite frank, it's still a reasonable job at that in the broader scope of things. There's still a long way to go. But that very organization has been standing at the sidelines, being a bystander in what's going on in the world approach to COVID. It hasn't stood up for human rights. It hasn't stood up for the Charter of Human Rights. And it's become an enabler of what's going on, as is the World Health Organization. These central institutions that are supposed to represent the interests of the people are actually, you know, enabling this. It's what you permit, you promote. So I also feel off the back of this, once this is all passed, which it will eventually, both in terms of the virus and the totalitarianism, because we're not dealing with a dictator here. We're not dealing with a singular dictator. We're dealing with an authoritarian regime. Authoritarian regimes always collapse by their own merit, their own weight of lunacy. That can be accelerated by an organized resistance, but they will eventually collapse. But
could you just say on that point, have you been keeping tabs on almost the what would you call it, the implosion of the Democratic Party over in America? I mean, it's like a mass exodus at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all of this thing will start to unfold by its own accord, but the pressure cooker, it's like a pressure cooker, and the more the resistance develops, the higher the pressure becomes, and eventually bursts. Which isn't a nice. It's not going to be a nice thing to go through. And I say people prepare, you know, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, practically prepare yourself for things to get worse before they get better. Because then you can make peace. Like once you make peace with the fact that it could get worse, it's like accept what it is, and then see the world better than it is right now, and start to move towards that. Start to take conscious action towards creating change. And also,
you know, just from a mental health point of view, Dan, I'm just keen to ask you, because without, it's preparing, isn't it, mentally, like you've just said. I think we kind of know where this is going. I've personally found I would rather them just get on with it. Because I know, I feel like I'm in limbo at the moment, and things are going to escalate, and we know about these different strains, and then, you know, they're going to lower the ages, or children are going to be invited firstly, you know, from age 5 to 12, and we know Pfizer are doing the trials from 6 months plus, and, you know, potentially the unvaccinated are going to get locked out here. Vaccine passports, in my opinion, is inevitable in this country in the short term. We're talking, you know, probably straight after Christmas. So keen to know your thoughts on that, and if you can resonate with the kind of point what I'm saying. I almost feel like I just want the lockdown to happen. So I'm like, right, okay, it's done. I can fight back now.
There's a lot of people feeling that way. There's a lot of people saying just going to check out, let it be, and many people will do that, ride it out. You know, it is about riding it out. But we also have to recognize the role that resistance has to play in accelerating that path, because it does, because it pushes the, to use the term oppressor in this case, there's an oppressive set of policies being enacted by various institutions and organizations and individuals around the world. The more resistance they experience, the more panicked they become, the more crazy they behave, and the more likely they are to collapse. So resistance accelerates that path, but just rest assured that it will pass. And I think from a mental health perspective, this also comes down to a broader piece where I'm not a religious person. I don't subscribe to any religion. I do find some of the Eastern texts fascinating. I do enjoy reading about Buddhism. I do enjoy reading about Taoism and various other cultures. In fact, I enjoy reading about other Western organizations. I just enjoy reading about culture. And I was listening to something the other day that it was about transhumanism and this kind of pursuit, which is one of the pillars of what's underpinning some of what's happening right now. This pursuit to extend life, which I want to live for as long as feasibly possible. But this technological advancement at the cost of everything else, and the prioritization of everything else. And what we've seen is the kind of erosion of the church. We've seen the decline of religion. We've seen a decline in spirituality. And there was this really ironic photo that one of my team sent me, which is a picture of his local church, which had a queue of people queuing to get in the church. But they weren't going there to pray or worship. They were going there to get their vaccine, because that's where they're getting their faith right now. They're placing their faith in a vaccine. Now, on the flip side, there'll be plenty of people who are realists and practicalists who say, if you're overweight, praying to God ain't gonna, it ain't gonna necessarily help you lose any weight. There's the great story of the overgrown garden where the pastor comes to the door and says, so this beautiful garden. And the pastor comes to the door to congratulate the owner of the house on this beautiful garden. He says, well, he said, the Lord's done a wonderful job of your garden. He said, well, you should have seen it before, when the Lord had it all to himself, because, he had to cultivate the garden, meaning that we have to play a part. So I'm not saying that, just going to church and praying is going to, keep you safe from a respiratory virus. I'm not saying that, but my point is people have put their faith in technology, and it's what we're seeing in many ways is a resemblance of the fact that people don't have faith any longer in something beyond themselves. They don't have faith in themselves. They don't have faith in themselves. They don't have faith in their neighbor, which is showing up as a lack of trust. And as a result, they're putting all their faith in technology to save them because they're afraid. Whereas my own spiritual journey has taken to a point, and I was out running today, and I was just looking up at nature and this blue sky and this wonderful sun emerging through the trees. And I have this faith. I have faith in humanity. I have faith in this divine force, this fabric of life that connects us all. And I have faith that there's something beyond us, the unexplainable force that can help. Whether that's purely a human imagination, even if it's just that, it's enough to know that we can transcend this. And it's having faith in something beyond ourselves, a higher self, a higher spirit, whatever you want to do, puts you in a place of ease. It takes you out of the present moment. It puts you in it puts this place of like, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to be okay. But that doesn't mean I just sit back and just allow it to be,
So just for clarity, I have no intentions of sitting back and letting anything happen. But I just feel like it's a bit of a limbo. I'm kind of like, I feel like the government have already made their decision. I feel that if we're lucky, inverted commas, to be allowed Christmas, which I mean, like, clearly I'll not be adhering to any of that. Ironically, we're having Christmas on our own anyway.
Yes, yeah.
That's through choice,
Well, I put a poll on Twitter. I said, who's going to decide how you're going to spend your Christmas this year? I said, you or the government. And that most people voted themselves. I don't think most people will actually follow through with their actions, and words may not tally. We've seen that last Christmas, but some people comment that actually my family, which is a fair point, because other people in your family see the world different to you. They may be the ones that determine how you live your Christmas. But ultimately, we have to. The governments get authority from the people, and the fact that last year the government was able to, in the UK, basically call off Christmas pretty much within days of Christmas unfolding, and people to follow along, has given them the power to do that again. And lo and behold, there's a new variant just in time. So the way we start to separate that power is from the people not complying, and the reality is the government is treating us like naughty children who cannot be trusted and must be sent to their rooms because they are not responsible enough to go and eat with the adults. So we have to recognize that after, as I've previously mentioned, nearly 2 years now, there's enough data out there for you to be able to start to self-assess your own potential risks and to have an adult conversation with your family about, are they unwell? Are they feeling sick? You know, are you comfortable being around the family this year? And just having an adult conversation, you can make an informed decision for yourselves. That's, you know, that's what being an adult is. Because it's not being a radical individualist who's just saying, I'm just going to do what the heck I want. It's about saying, I'm going to respect my individual choices, but also respect the choices of others, which is just what being a good citizen is. And you can do that without the intervention of your government, you know. So it's about being responsible as adults. And there are many people who argue against that and saying that, you know, that the whole thing's been overblown and people have been put into fear, which I also understand. But you also have to respect other people's interpretation of the world as you see it and as they see it, which means that there has to be some sort of compromise, probably. But that compromise is on an individual, because one of the human rights we have is the right to family life. And again, another UN human right that has not been upheld by the UN is that right to family life. And the government, once again, will flout that right if we allow them. So it's about now saying, to start to separate the power from the governments, putting it back in the hands of the people and making empowered choices for you and your family, and to do so reasonably. And that's how we start to decouple the power from here in the government. Because already, I mean, I was in the supermarket today. I couldn't believe how many people. I think I was the only one not wearing a mask. I saw two people not wearing a mask. Ironically, one was disabled, like physically disabled in a wheelchair, and the other was, I could only, you know, without disrespecting him, describing as elderly. So the people who are quote unquote vulnerable were the ones not wearing masks. I mean, I don't consider myself to be vulnerable at all. I'm just purely not willing to comply with the rational government mandates that don't make any logical sense.
Well, a little bit of hope. In Doncaster, I think we're probably a little bit more rebellious. I'd say it was at least 30% weren't wearing a mask at my local supermarket. So there's definitely hope. But final couple of questions for you. Do you think, and I know that we're not laying down to this, Dan, and you're at the helm of all of that, but do you think the vaccine passports are inevitable? Would be my first question.
I'm not decided. I in England, I can't be sure. I think it's the one thing where, I mean, if they are going to come in, they're going to come in within the next month. Let's put it that way. If they don't come in by the end of January, I don't think they will. I don't think they will. But it would be fantastic if we can ward off. If we can be one of the few countries to ward off vaccine passports, because then again, we become a bastion of hope to other nations. And already other parts of the world have already put vaccine passports in and taken them out. There's places that have done that. So it comes back to taking the ball in our hands. And this week on Q is a week of action. Together, having a week of action this week to stand against vaccine passports, whether you already have vaccine passports or whether your country has vaccine passports or not. To actually write to today, call your MP, to actually phone your MP today, pick up the phone. Because people are saying, oh, we're not getting responses from writing letters. Call your MP today. I'm going to do it live on the podcast tonight. I'm going to call my MP live on the podcast. He probably won't be there, but the beautiful thing is, last time I did this, I left a voice note and I had a response by the end of the day. Whereas previously, I had to wait 3 to 6 months for an email to come back. So we're going to be calling, emailing, booking appointments face to face with their MPs. To go in there to be a help, not a hindrance, to say we want to support you in making sure, if you're in England, for instance, or another part of the world that doesn't have vaccine passports, that we don't have vaccine passports that discriminate against citizens and causes grievous harm to the economy. We want to support local businesses, making sure they're not put into that kind of pressure, whatever angle you want to take. So that's taking place this week, and that's going to help ward it off. And for those countries that do have it, we need to start decoupling it. We need to start showing, because again, every cloud is a silver lining. The countries that have moved forward with vaccine passports, they've devastated their economy. They haven't performed any better in terms of the virus. So we've got evidence. We've got hard evidence that the vaccine passports haven't succeeded in so many different ways. So we can use that evidence. Although the world we live in is not grounded in evidence. We live in a post-truth world right now. It's all ideological. It's not, you know, facts and figures rarely win the day. But at least we have it in our armory. Alongside our own emotive, because actually when we start to tell those emotional stories, you know, say of the butcher or the fruit and veg stop on the high street that's gone out of business because of the COVID and the responses to COVID. You start to use those emotive stories, and then you start to use the evidence to back up, how it could have been avoided if it wasn't for these government interventions. Then we can start to win hearts and minds. We've got to start winning hearts and minds. However we do this, it's got to start with the heart. And my view on all of this is, if we lead with love, we don't throw boomerangs of anger out into the world just to strike us back on the head. We live with love, then people see that love and that empowerment in us, and they see it. But when they see it in us, they see it in themselves. And when they see it in themselves, they'll be more willing to take action. So do I think passports are coming? Maybe, maybe not. But whatever happens, we will continue the fight to make sure that we don't follow the path of vaccine passports or digital IDs or any form of discriminatory technology that could divide society. So whatever happens, it doesn't matter. We're going to keep moving, and we'll keep moving until it's over.
Oh, I love that. What a perfect way to end the show. Dan, you've been phenomenal. I think the work that you're doing is absolutely instrumental. Where can people connect with you? How can they sign the declaration?
Yep. So go to togetherdeclaration.org. That's the first thing you want to do in terms of this campaign. Go and follow the Together Declaration Twitter channel. Look for our Telegram channel as well. You'll find all the details of the campaign, how you can support this week. Every day this week, there's action that you can take. And on a personal level, if you follow the Pandemic Podcast, you'll find us on YouTube. We broadcast live on Twitter and Facebook. We're about to launch a really exciting community proposition to bring people together across the world, focused on this piece of resistance and reimagination. So we're looking at how we can unite together on the resistance front, but how we can also start to build a better world, and also looking at personal development and spiritual transformation, because this really is a spiritual awakening as much as it is a opportunity for change. So join our mailing list, danjgregory.com, to find out all about that and the latest podcast episodes. And we all got to do our bit. We just got to keep doing our bit, and together we are stronger, and together we'll overcome this.
Fantastic. You've been amazing. Thanks again for your time, Dan. You've been awesome.
My pleasure. Thank you.